A millionaire gave a worthless horse to a bum as a joke, but ended up bitterly regretting it. The sun beat down on the asphalt like the sky itself wanted to drive out anyone who didn't belong. Celso walked slowly along the cracked sidewalk of Station Street, pushing his old shopping cart piled with cardboard, dented cans, and a few plastic bottles. The creak of its crooked wheels was his only companion. Nobody greeted him. Nobody even glanced his way. It was as if he weren't there. Store windows showed clothes he'd never touch. The scent of fresh bread and expensive perfume drifted from half-open doors, followed by laughter from people living in a world where he was just part of the scenery and the ugly part you tried to ignore. Celso didn't complain. He'd long since forgotten what it was like to talk to someone. He'd learned to make do with silence. All he felt was that dull ache in his chest, different from hunger. It was the absence of everything. That afternoon, things were busier than usual. Luxury cars filled the streets around the central square. Thoroughbred horses paraded in makeshift pens lined with golden ribbons. It was auction day, the most expensive horse sale in the region, where the rich competed for bloodlines and bragging rights. Celso, as always, stayed on the sidelines. He stopped by the closed newsstand for some shade and watched the animals with calm curiosity. There was something about them that fascinated him. Their latent power, the alertness in their eyes, the dignity in their movements. Even the fanciest ones still bore their instincts, things he felt he'd lost himself. Up on a decorated platform, Alonso laughed loudly. He was 27, wearing dark sunglasses, a crisp white linen shirt, and carrying himself like someone who'd always been admired. The son of a banker, a young heir enamored with his own reflection, and at that moment, thoroughly bored. Then he spotted Celso standing off to the side, filthy, with a long beard, and his cart leaning against the curb. "Hey, look at that guy," Alonso said, nodding towards Celso so everyone could hear. "Looks like he's here to buy a thoroughbred with his cardboard." Ha 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 ha. The laughter swelled, some nervous, some genuine. People eager to be close to the young millionaire. Alonso hopped down from the platform, microphone in hand, still chuckling. He stopped in front of a horse left out of the main pens, tied to a fence, old ribs showing, limping on a front leg, one eye clouded over. "Nobody wants this one, right?" Alonso announced, all drama. "But I think he's perfect. Just like our friend over there, beat up, falling apart, invisible." The crowd roared with laughter. He paid the minimum bid for the animal and had it brought over to Celso. "Here you go, my man," he said, holding up the reins like a trophy. "A gift. You're now the proud owner of a thoroughbred. Enjoy your new life as a rancher." More guffaws. Celso looked at the horse. Then he looked at Alonso. He didn't say a word. He simply reached out and took the reins. A strange hush fell for a moment. Maybe they expected him to shout, to cry, to refuse, but he just turned and started walking away with the animal, which limped along at his side as if it already knew him. The crowd went silent, thrown off, before they resumed their chatter and laughter. Celso walked until he was out of the square. He stopped only when the shouts and voices faded behind him. He gently stroked the horse's neck, feeling the rough hide under its dirty coat. "You got tossed aside too, huh?" he murmured, his voice hoarse, almost forgetting he existed. "It's okay. We'll see what we can do." The horse snorted softly, as if it understood. Celso managed a small, sad smile. With the reins in one hand and his shopping cart abandoned on the curb, he headed toward the vacant lot where he lived. No one followed. No one cared. But something had changed, and none of them knew what that simple, humiliating gift had just set in motion. The lot where Celso lived sat behind an old abandoned warehouse, half swallowed by tall weeds and debris. There, among torn tarps and pieces of wood leaning like poorly stacked cards, he'd built what he called home. 3 walls, an entrance covered by a threadbare rug, And inside, a flat mattress, a bucket of water, and 2 faded photographs he kept hidden under a broken roof tile. He decided to name him Ceniza. The name came one night at dawn, while he cleaned the horse's hooves with ragged cloths and water from a bottle he'd begged for at a gas station. The horse breathed with effort, but accepted the touch. He didn't shy away, he just watched. One eye was healthy, the other blind, but both somehow saw more than anyone in the town. Ceniza, Celso murmured, twisting the word on his tongue as if tasting it. Because you're the ash of an old fire. They think you're dead, but there's still embers burning inside. The horse gave no sign, but something in his quiet seemed to agree. Celso cobbled together a pen from discarded pallets and metal grates. He fashioned a shelter from torn tarps and black plastic. He gathered long grasses from the overgrowth, leftover veggies from the market, fruit peels. Sometimes he even shared whatever scraps he earned. He didn't think about it. It was automatic, like caring for an outside piece of himself. Progress was slow. The leg wounds took forever to heal. His ribs remained visible. But Ceniza stood every day, and Celso stayed by his side. At night, with the cold wind and the distant hum of the city that had forgotten him, Celso leaned against the horse's flank and spoke in a low voice, as if Ceniza were the only ear he had left. "I had a daughter," he whispered once. "Her name was Clara. She died before I completely sank. My wife left before that. She said she couldn't live with a man drowning inside himself." Silence. "I never asked for help. I thought if I stayed quiet, the world would just forget me." And it did. Ceniza sighed, a soft, warm breath. Celso laid his forehead against the horse's dirty mane and wept without a sound, just tears falling like rain from an exhausted sky. By day, Celso kept scavenging cardboard, but now he returned earlier. He wanted to be there. He wanted to see if Ceniza had gotten up. He wanted to clean the horse's eyes, see if he'd eaten, if he'd lean against the makeshift fence like someone waiting for company. And Ceniza waited. One afternoon, coming back from the street, Celso found him standing firm, head raised, eyes fixed on the path where he always came. Celso's chest tightened. For the first time in years, someone was waiting for him. He knelt, stroked the horse's muzzle, and whispered, "We're not done yet, right?" Ceniza neighed softly, almost a lament, almost a song. That night, Celso dreamed of a long, dark road with a single point of light far ahead. And walking beside him, always by his side, was a grey horse, scarred but strong. He woke with an idea he couldn't yet name, but it felt like a seed in his chest. It wasn't hope. It was something more dangerous. It was the will to live. His first step was tentative. Just after 2 in the morning, Celso opened the pen. The city slept under a cloudy sky, only stray dogs barking and the distant hum of broken street lamps disturbed the quiet. "Come on, Ceniza. Let's stretch our legs." The horse hesitated. He still limped, but he walked. Celso didn't try to mount him. He took the reins and simply walked beside him, like 2 old friends sharing a silent weariness. They went to the end of the dirt road, then turned toward the old rail yard. There, among abandoned tracks and tall weeds, they walked for over an hour. Their pace was slow, almost meditative. Celso spoke little, but he watched everything. The careful way Ceniza placed his hooves, the rhythm of his breath, the sound of worn horseshoes against the earth. On their way back, when the horse nudged his muzzle against Celso's shoulder as if to say thanks, Celso felt a warmth rise through him. It wasn't a fever. It was something new, a gentle but deep burning fire. Purpose. In the nights that followed, they repeated the route, always a little farther. Sometimes Celso sang softly, other times he spoke to himself, recalling old stories, trying to pull them back from oblivion. "My father used to say a horse understands your pace. If you run, he panics. If you stop, he doubts. But if you walk with him, he follows." Sinisa listened, not like a trained animal, but like a devoted companion. He began to respond to light touches, to simple cues. His gaze sharpened. His step grew surer. Celso too began to change. He slept better. He drank less. He feared less. He noticed small things, the scent of the trees, the sounds of the night, the feel of his own feet on the ground. It was as if, by teaching Sinisa to endure, he was reteaching his own heart to keep beating. One early dawn, they saw the lights on at a bakery opening before sunrise. Celso thought to beg for yesterday's bread, but he paused, watching his reflection in the glass. He saw himself next to the horse, dirty, thin, but with his chest thrust out. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel invisible. He felt real. On the way home, they turned onto a street he'd never taken. It was steeper. Sinisa hesitated, then climbed. At the top of the hill, the town lay below like a carpet of tiny lights. Celso took a deep breath. It was there, on that rise, he spotted a smashed-up poster plastered to a lamppost. Big endurance race, open sign-ups, any horse, any rider, all welcome. Celso stopped, staring at the paper, heart pounding. He chuckled to himself, almost in disbelief. All welcome, huh? He looked at Sinisa, who snorted as if to reply. Something inside him began to stir. It wasn't about winning. It was about proving something, that they were alive, that they deserved to be there, that the world might laugh. But they would keep walking to the end, together. The registration form was filled out in pen, in shaky handwriting, on an improvised counter at the Municipal Equestrian Club's headquarters. The woman who took the paper looked Celso up and down, trying to hide her shock. But she couldn't help the sarcasm in her voice. You're really going to compete with that horse, the one from the auction? Celso simply nodded. He didn't offer an explanation. He just left the paperwork, said thank you, and walked away. The next morning, his name was posted on the bulletin board alongside the other competitors. Nobody believed it. Some thought it was a prank. Others suspected a marketing stunt. But when the official race website confirmed it, the whole town burst out laughing. Memes began to circulate, photoshopped images of Celso riding a hobby horse perched on a broom or atop a donkey strapped to a skateboard. The sight of Sinisa, old and limping, became the ultimate symbol of absurdity. In cafes, barbershops, and on social media, everyone had something to say. This old man's lost it. It's an insult to the event. He's gonna die out on the trail. The humiliation hit hard again, but Celso didn't hide. He kept scavenging cardboard by day and training with Sinisa at dawn. He didn't respond to any taunt. He just kept walking. When Alonso found out about the registration, he nearly fell out of his chair, laughing. He called his friends over to show them a screenshot of the site, clapped his hands, and openly mocked, "This is gold. The hobo and the crippled horse. This guy's gonna cause an accident." He filmed a video mocking the situation, laughing beside his purebred, and posted it online. It was shared over 1,000 times. Celso never saw the video, but he heard the laughter in the streets. He felt the stares. He knew what people were saying. It was as if the entire town was trying to shove him back into the hole they thought he belonged in. That night he cried, not out of sadness but from pent-up rage, anger at their scorn, their easy laughter, their short memories when it came to other people's pain. But he also cried out of fear, because deep down, part of him still doubted. What if they were right? What if it really was ridiculous? The next day, he barely left his shelter. He watched Sinisa from a distance. The horse ate sparingly, but stood firm, as if waiting for the man who'd saved him to decide. Celso approached slowly and pressed his forehead against the horse's cheek. They stood like that, breathing together. "I don't want to win, you hear me?" he whispered. "I just want to show we're still here." Seniza tilted his head slightly, his good eye meeting Celso's. There wasn't precise understanding there, but something deeper. There was presence. Their training nights grew longer. Celso began to ride bit by bit, at first just to walk, then to trot. Seniza resisted but didn't balk. They were in sync, the horse feeling the man's pain, the man carrying the horses. Sometimes as they passed cars at dawn, Celso heard honks, shouts of mockery, even bottles thrown from windows. He stayed his course, unflinching, without answering back. On the eve of the race, someone spray-painted a nearby wall. Seniza. Embarrassment. Celso looked at the message calmly. Then he grabbed black paint and wrote over it, "Embarrassment is living with your eyes closed." In the pre-dawn hours, after one of their workouts, they paused atop a hill. The town still slept. Down below, lights flickered on, and the sky began to brighten. Celso ran his dirty, steady hand through Seniza's mane. They'll laugh, they'll doubt, but tomorrow, we'll show them. Sunday dawned slowly, but the town was already stirring. Luxury cars crowded the outskirts of the field, where the endurance race would start. There were tents with logos, colorful flags, excited announcers. It was more than a competition. It was a spectacle. Celso arrived quietly. He walked among the trailers and competition horses, holding Seniza's reins. The horse neighed softly, alert. There was no fancy gear or uniform, just a patched plaid shirt, worn-out jeans, and a straw hat with the brim bent. Seniza, cleaned up but still dull-coated, limped slightly, yet walked with determination. Silence fell around them. Some people laughed. Others just exchanged stunned looks. A woman whispered, "This should be banned. They're toying with safety." Alonso appeared on his black stallion, imposing with shining tack. He shook hands and flashed practiced smiles, until he saw Celso. His face registered surprise for a moment, then snapped into mockery. "Well, well, you made it this far. Congratulations," he said in a false polite tone. "Now all that's left is to endure the shame." Celso didn't respond. He looked ahead, steadied the old saddle, and climbed onto Seniza with calm precision, as someone who knows the right timing for each movement. The course was long, 60 kilometers of dirt trails, hills, streams, and wooded stretches. Most competitors banked on speed, powerful horses, planned rest stops, and logistical support. Celso had none of that. Just him, Seniza, and the countless dawns they'd crossed together. At the starting signal, the others shot off like arrows. Celso and Seniza hung back at the rear. The onlookers laughed. A reporter even quipped, laughing, "And we already have our tail-ender, folks, a strong contender for the Persistence Prize or the Delusion Award." But Celso didn't hear him. He just moved forward. His pace was steady, rhythmic, just like in training. 1, 2, 3. Step, breathe, step. Hours passed. The heat rose. The ground dried, the dust grew thicker. A purebred stumbled and fell. Its rider panicked. Another horse pushed too hard, refused to go on. Vets arrived and pulled them out. Further along, one competitor slipped in a muddy patch and twisted an ankle. Another horse stopped responding, exhausted. At each checkpoint, fewer riders remained. But Celso and Seniza pressed on. Sweat streamed down Celso's face. He said nothing. He just kept the rhythm. The horse panted, but didn't stop. They passed stalled horses, riders lying by the trail, animals covered with wet blankets, and they kept going. On the final stretch, a long, uneven climb, Seniza faltered. He wobbled, nearly went down. Celso dismounted, tipped his hat, took a deep breath, and looked into the horse's eyes. "You got me here, my friend. Now I go with you." He gripped the reins firmly and climbed up beside him, step by step, every muscle burning, every footfall like stepping on embers. The crowd's roar could be heard in the distance, shouts, honks, applause. When they reached the hilltop, they saw the final straight. No one else was still moving. The others had either finished or dropped out. A commentator's voice crackled over the loudspeaker in astonishment. "Attention everyone, the last rider on the course. Celso, the man nobody believed in. He's coming in. He's walking in." The crowd watched. And then utter silence. Celso climbed back onto Ceniza. The horse trembled but obeyed. Together they advanced. They didn't run, they walked. When they crossed the finish line, there were no trophies waiting. But what followed was greater than any award. A standing ovation. People crying. Those who had laughed now moved to tears. Celso stopped in the center of the arena, looked around and removed his hat. Ceniza lowered his head, as if in understanding. Silence turned to respect. Respect turned to reverence. And Alonso, standing in the background with a scowl, couldn't laugh. He couldn't pretend. He had been beaten, but not in the race, in the soul. The next morning, Celso's name was everywhere. Social media feeds that had been full of jokes were now flooded with videos of his and Ceniza's finish. A boy had filmed the moment on his phone and captioned it, "The horse nobody wanted made it." The video went viral. The footage showed the slow steps, the sweat, the steady gaze, the crowd rising to their feet, silence giving way to applause. It wasn't just emotion, it was impact, because in some way everyone saw themselves in that man's stubbornness, in that horse's endurance. Local papers called it the miracle of dignity. But Celso saw none of that. That morning he was tending Ceniza's hooves, gently cleaning the fresh bandages a stable hand had given him. He said little, merely watched the horse eat slowly, as if nothing had changed. Yet inside him, something was different. There was silence, but not the silence of being forgotten. It was the quiet of someone who had found peace. Across town, Alonso hadn't slept well. He'd spent the night watching the video on repeat, like someone reliving a personal defeat. But what hurt wasn't the video. It was what he couldn't avoid feeling. He'd laughed at Celso, humiliated him, filmed him, exposed him, and now it weighed on him like lead. 2 days later, he drove down to the vacant lot. He parked some distance off, walked slowly over the soft earth, his designer shirt incongruous in the dust. Celso sensed him before he spoke. He was sitting, fixing part of the pen, and didn't stand. He just looked up. Alonso stopped 2 meters away. "I came to apologize," he said softly, his voice catching. "For the horse. For what I did. I know it can't be undone." Celso was silent. A torn tarp fluttered overhead. Ceniza watched from inside the pen. "I was just another guy laughing at your pain," Alonso continued. "And you showed that pain can't be killed by laughter. You have to walk through it, with courage." Silence again. Then Celso spoke, flat and direct. "You thought you gave me trash, but you gave me a chance." Alonso lowered his eyes. His pride dissolved right there. "I want to really help now. I have some land by the river. I was going to build something else, but if you want, we could set up a stable. Your way, to teach, to care, for the people." Celso looked at him, fighting old doubts. A trick? Guilt disguised as kindness. But when he met Alonso's eyes, he saw something he knew well, real shame, the kind that only comes from losing your own arrogance. He took a deep breath. "If it's for horses like Ceniza, and for kids who've never even sat in a saddle, okay, but I'm not asking for charity. I want to work." Alonso held out his hand. Celso hesitated, then shook it. No smiles, no promises. Just a silent agreement between 2 very different men, yet somehow equally marked by what they'd lived. That night, as he straightened Ceniza's blanket, Celso whispered, Look at where we've ended up, friend. The horse turned his head and nudged Celso's hand. It wasn't an answer. It was a bond. The land by the river was flat, ringed by low trees, with an old dust-filled barn full of quiet. When Celso first arrived, he surveyed it as you would soil before planting. The ground was dry. Weeds grew tall, the barn crumbled, but to him it was fertile because it was real, and this time it was his too. They worked in silence, Celso and Alonso. One carried lumber and hammered, the other coordinated purchases, ran wiring, paid helpers. Neither tried to make up for the past. They were just building. Day by day, new stalls rose, a circular arena took shape, and a small tool room with clean buckets appeared. The stable grew, but it was no luxury farm. It was a place of healing. Zeniza got his own spacious stall with fresh hay and a clean water trough. His wounds had healed. His coat was fuller, still marked, but now with stories, not pain. Soon visitors arrived. First curious neighborhood kids, then teenagers who'd never touched a horse. Before long, Celso was teaching them with the same patience he'd shown Zeniza. How to mount with respect, how to feed, how to listen. "You don't make the horse obey," he'd say softly. "He lets you lead him. Riding is listening with your whole body." The children absorbed it like a secret language, and it was the language of dignity. Word spread slowly, as real things do. People from distant neighborhoods came to see the old man and the racehorse. Many expected a hero. They found a simple man, hands rough, eyes deep, offering water, shade, and time. One boy in particular, Mateus, 11, the son of a laborer, became Celso's shadow. He was always there, helping, asking, learning. One day he nailed a scrap of wood above the stable's door, letters carved with a crooked pocket knife. Corral Zeniza, where what seemed lost finds its way. Celso read it and was silent for a long moment. Then he gently ruffled the boy's hair, saying nothing. His eyes said it all. Years later, the place became a model, not for fame, but for its example. Young people who came there left addiction behind, returned to school, learned trades. Some went on to careers with horses. Others simply carried something they'd never had before, respect for themselves. Zeniza lived to old age. He died one calm morning, lying in the pasture under a gentle sun. Celso found him peaceful, as if he'd fulfilled his purpose. He buried him by the barn and planted a tree beside the grave. He never mourned loudly, just sat for hours by the grave in silence. Alonso, now more mature and humble, came to sit beside Celso. "He changed everything, didn't he?" he whispered. "He reminded me who I was," Celso replied, "and who I still could be." At dusk, Celso sometimes rode another horse, a younger one, trained with the same care. He'd ride in quiet through the brush, his hat pulled low, and anyone who saw him from afar might think, "That man is free." And they'd be right, because dignity is freedom. And Celso had crossed the most important line of all, the one that separates being forgotten from having meaning.